A very good morning to all our dear listeners and viewers. Welcome to ACFIM Talks. It's another edition. My name is Felix Kafuma. I'll be moderating this session, and I am joined with three distinguished guests that I'll be introducing in a short while. But before we start, I am encouraging each one of you join us on our live discussion today by hitting our YouTube page. Also, you can catch us live on Facebook and also catch us live on the Twitter handle. The details are below the screen so that you can be part of this discussion. Today, we are discussing what are the implications of the closure of the NGOs. You know, I think it's a week now because it was a Friday, last Friday, when all of us woke up to very interesting news that 54 NGOs had been suspended. Some indefinitely suspended, others they just halted the operations. And the arguments were that they were not compliant to the Ngo Act of 2006. In terms of compliance, they were referring to that, in fact, they said out of the 54, 23 of them were operating with expired permits. 15 of them hadn't filed annual returns, and 16 of the other 16 were operating without other licenses that are necessary for them to do the work they do. Today, I'm joined with, I have with me three, they are not necessarily new faces within the sector. I'll start by introducing the lady first. The lady, she's called Imelda. I hope I get the names right. Imelda Namagga. She's an economist. She has done a lot of work around policy analysis and budget advocacy work. She's currently working as a budget advocacy advisor for the Health System Strengthening Project, which is, I think, residing in the Ministry of Health, supported by World Bank. She also worked with Uganda Debt Network. She's also the current board member of Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. You are most welcome, Imelda Namagga. I hope she can hear us.
Thank you
my
very
other
much. And for our viewers, nice to be with you and fellow listeners.
Okay, it's great. And the other person I should introduce, who is the person you see when there are issues concerning human rights, defending the human rights docket within the country. And I can say that Uganda is at the interesting times. I think when you unpack this whole debacle of closure of the NGOs, there are issues concerning human rights that also need to be discussed in here. But in the studio with me, I have the Executive Director of National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, Robert Kirenga. Robert Kirenga has really done a lot of work around human rights. The National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders is basically an umbrella of individuals or organizations that are working around promoting and protecting human rights defenders in Uganda. But he has done a lot of work around human rights. I think you worked with UNDP. I was looking at your rich CV in Zimbabwe. Also was an advisor with the Danish Institute for Human Rights. He also at some time headed the Human Rights Center. So I think we have the right person to discuss the closure in perspective of the law and the rights per se. You are most welcome, Robert Kirenga.
Thank you very much, Mr. Felix Kafuma. I'm glad to be part of this debate.
Okay, and last we have Job Kiija. He heads the Innovations for Democratic Engagement and Action idea. I must say that this is a platform that provides space for incubating ideas, reflection, conceptualizing, space for young people to innovate around issues concerning democracy. And he also worked with the NGO Forum I remember him very actively involved in the Citizens Manifesto. He took lead in that process. Job, you are most welcome.
Thank you, Felix. Good morning, viewers and listeners, Robert, Imelda, and everyone else.
Okay, let's get this conversation started. First of all, let me start with you, Joe, because among the three panelists, you are among those. Your organization is among those affected by the closure. So help me understand. You first of all, you were not suspended indefinitely as an organization. Yours was just halted. And the argument is that you have not registered with the NGO Act accordingly. So, is it mandatory for an organization to register with the NGO Act? Or if I register, for example, with the Companies Act, all other agencies that are or within another legal framework, I can proceed and operate without necessarily registering with the NGO, using the NGO Act or the NGO Bureau.
Thank you, Felix. Actually, on our part, we don't even know what they did because we haven't received any official communication from them. I mean, the guys at the NGO Bureau have our contacts. They know where to find us if they need to communicate with us. But issuing a press release is just like any other organization can issue a press release. Without writing to us officially, we will consider ourselves still operating normally because, first of all, we do not subscribe to the NGO Bureau. We don't subscribe to the NGO Act because the law is very clear. We debated this. We have debated it time and again. And even the guys at the NGO Bureau know it, how difficult it is to force companies limited by guarantee to operate under the NGO Bureau. Because the law is very vague. The definition of organization is so vague in that it can cover anybody that is doing anything, including beginners, including football associations, including burial associations, including wedding meetings. So for you to have a law that is not specific is in itself a problem. And in that regard, I think the best thing is to defy such a law. Now, secondly, when we were drafting that NGO law, of course, a number of people celebrated because the piece of legislation that we have at the moment seems to be far better than what had been proposed. What had been proposed by the NGO Bureau initially, of course, was so bad. So with a lot of input from us, back and forth engagement, lobbying MPs, lobbying different actors, we managed to get what we have at the moment as the current piece of legislation, which is the NGO Act. I recall when the Minister for Internal Affairs then, I think it was Honorable James Baba, I think at that time Honorable Ronda, who was the initiator of the law, had actually passed on. So Baba, when Section 44 was opposed on the floor of Parliament, which actually is the gist of all these problems, he finally said, Honorable Speaker, if I lose Section 44, I have no law and I would rather abandon it. So then there were some sort of compromises, but there is that particular provision which was trying to draw companies limited by guarantee into the NGO Act. And MPs argued, and we had also all argued, that it is not possible for the NGO Bureau to regulate companies limited by guarantee because they are regulated under another piece of legislation, which is the URSB Act, the Companies Act. And so that they lost it. Now, interestingly, what happened later, which we came to learn, is that before the law was sent to the president for assent, and if you read that law properly, you will find there's some redundant thing. I forget the actual section, the actual provision, which talks about permits, how organizations must get permits when a permit expires and you don't renew, the fines, etc., etc. And then somehow it says companies limited by guarantee that do work which looks like NGO work are also regulated by that particular provision. It is the only section in that whole law that actually talks about companies limited by guarantee, save for the process of an organization becoming an NGO, whereby you must first incorporate and then go to the NGO bureau. So if you look at it, and I remember when we were working on the regulations, I think we were somewhere in Kiija, I raised this issue to Stephen Okello, who is now the one who is enforcing it, Chairman Ambassador Kangwaje then, and I told them, you guys, when you look at this provision, it is redundant. So for us to continue and even make regulations for it in our regulations is a problem in itself, because we are pushing something that is redundant, of which we have received credible information that it wasn't passed by Parliament, it was just smuggled into this law before the law was assented to. So I think for me, the real beginning of our problem is the fraudulent nature in which this law was actually passed, and the fraudulent nature in which it is being enforced. So there's fraud which is going on at the NGO bureau. They are talking about non-compliance, about us, but yet actually they are the ones who are not complying. If you come to look at it, the NGO bureau is supposed to have an NGO board, which does not exist at the moment. So who is supervising them? Who are they reporting to? Are they just doing things as they wish? But when you're talking about corporate governance, of which is the same thing they are challenging us about, do they have corporate governance in place? Now, the Act provides that there's supposed to be an adjudication committee. For over 5 years of implementing that Act, the adjudication committee is not in place. So they themselves cannot even adhere to their own law, and they want to come and force us to adhere to that law. So I think for me, that is a problem. As far as we are concerned as IDEA, we are operating legally. We are incorporated as a company limited by guarantee. We have been filing our annual returns. We have we have a team as an organization. We pay tax. We have a trading license, and we pay for it. So for the NGO bureau to come and start imposing itself on us, I think is a problem. But maybe finally, Felix, let me just say this. If the NGO bureau meant well and they really wanted to engage us and not just mudsling NGOs and tarnish our image, Stephen Okello, who is the ED of the bureau, and other staff of the NGO bureau have our contacts. They should have reached out to us without just going to issue what I call a reckless press release. Up to now, they have not reached out to us. So I wonder, should I take their thing seriously? Should I reach out to them? What should I do?
Okay. And on that note, you raised the spirit behind the action and whether they followed the actual process that they would have written to the affected NGOs before they rush to the media to make that announcement, which until now is the center of the debate. But let me come to Robert. Looking at this case, this scenario, which is not necessarily an isolated case of closing NGOs, it's just one of the many actions of government. You remember at some point, I think towards the elections, there was a new outfit that was being formed to engage in the electoral process. National election, I think it was National Election Watch Uganda. Before it could engage on the matters concerning elections, government came out and outlawed it. And again, there were issues whether they followed the law and also the spirit behind that. But even before then, we've seen a number of actions where consistent with government seems not to be providing the enabling environment within which civil society should operate. Some have even referred to the law, others are now referring to some of these actions. But what does this mean to civil society sector generally? Looking at how government is handling and relating with civil society, just even looking at this recently, closure or suspension of several NGOs, what does this mean to the sector as a whole and also moving forward?
Thank you very much, Felix. Thank you, my fellow panelists. I want to add my voice to Job's submissions in terms of the legislative framework. But in terms of the sector generally, I think we are heading for harder times, and it's high time we also stepped up our game in terms of how we can advocate for the state to appreciate the role of civil society in this economic development process of our country. My feeling and understanding is that I think there is the state, and I want us to differentiate the state from government. Oftentimes in our sector, we use the two terms interchangeably. And it's not the same. When we talk about the state and when we talk about government, the two are different things. When we are talking about the state as understood under political science, we are referring to that group of people who control the instruments of coercion, and that they can force you to do something that you would otherwise have not wished to do. While government, we are talking about the three different branches: the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. Now, the state is part of the executive, and it can control all the other three branches. Take it or leave it. There is what is the law and what is the actual practice. So you might have a state acting differently from what you'd expect a government to be operating. And this is what I'm observing myself. That when the executive comes out and says, or alludes to the fact that when we close Facebook, our understanding that we would not be able to eat matoke or grow matoke. And the matoke still continues to flow, and it is a clear indicator that someone does not appreciate the implications of ICT or innovation in our economy. And likewise, I think the state is underestimating the contribution of the NGO sector to the economic development or transformation of this country. We'll be discussing more on how this affects the country and affects the sector. But in my view, I think there is a total underestimation. Whereas the policy documents acknowledge the importance of the sector in social transformation, in socio-economic transformation, I have a great feeling that the ones that make decisions here, and those are the state actors, the state institution itself, do not seem to appreciate this. Now, you may say they've closed 54 or 54 organizations. To them, they may say 54 are nothing, because we have about 10,000 NGOs. In certain regulatory bodies, they'll tell you, look, there is no fight against the sector. In a total of about 10,000 organizations, if 3 or 4 organizations' accounts are frozen, it doesn't mean the sector is under attack. But every NGO matters in this country, because there are so many things that these NGOs do in terms of socio-economic development, that any disruption of the activities has a triple effect on the economy. Now, if you are waiting for the economy to first halt as a result of your negative activities, yet you are supposed to be creating an enabler. In fact, my interpretation of all this is that the state is failing to fulfill its obligations in as far as human rights advancement is concerned.
Wow, interesting. We are going to come back to revisit that discussion after I bring in Imelda here on the aspects of the real economic implications, because I think it is important to understand where is the state coming from. From your differentiation between the state and government, I think civil society is contending with the state, non-government in this case. But Imelda, you see, one of the things I think the government or the state is failing to appreciate is, in real economic terms, the contribution of the sector. And I've had this discussion with private sector players and other people who are not within the civil society sector, trying to, they look at civil society sector as, well, it can be sacrificed. They don't see it as a very significant key player, if like the way they look at private sector players. Probably because the information in the public arena is not enough to show the significant contribution of the sector in real economic terms, in terms of numbers. And for many years, we've known the president to believe in numbers. That is why every time he's talking about growth, he refers to numbers. But let's now talk about numbers concerning the contribution of the NGOs or the civil society sector. What does the state stand to lose, or what does Uganda stand to lose, if government continues to clamp down on the sector to close NGOs, suspend their operations, suspend their accounts. This kind of environment that seems to suffocate operations of the sector, what does government stand to lose? Now we have 54 closed. We don't know whether the number is stopping at 54. What are we losing in real terms? Give me the numbers, Imelda. Imelda, are you there? I think Imelda is offline. Robert, do you want to try?
Sorry?
Do you mind if you jumped in here to tell us the real numbers we are losing? Then I will come to Job at some point.
Unfortunately, Mr. Kafuma, I do not have the data, the statistics, as we would have derived them from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, because those are credible. But really,
but paint a picture.
Sorry?
Just paint a picture. Just paint a picture of what
our work itself, from the different angles of maybe accountability, where we hold duty bearers to account for their actions and their responsibilities. That action alone, that intervention, when ACU comes out to speak about how much we've lost during this COVID pandemic in terms of resources allocated to fight the pandemic, resources allocated to help the vulnerable, that alone creates shivers, and shivers within the state actors to an extent that where there is no civil society, they would have the free will to do anything they wanted. But because we come out and start making noise and shout, then there is somewhere a stopgap, and it has a financial implication. That where somebody could have stolen even billions and millions, he puts a pause and say, it looks like I've been caught. You can see the voices have an implication. Two, in terms of livelihood, the sector is, if I'm not mistaken, the second biggest employer in the formal sector from government. The private sector does not employ as much people as the NGO world. Then in terms of service delivery, where government has not been able to fulfill all its commitment, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, civil society has played a very key role in terms of service delivery. Then we have the element of advocacy, both at a national, regional, and international level, that you put Uganda at a map where you push certain social sector issues to have even our international partners, before they provide aid, so we need to see reform in such areas. So that kind of reform also, when you put it in monetary terms, has got an implication where it has saved the country a lot of money. I talked about employment. I talked about when we talk about development as a right, when you look at these group rights, how civil society has come out to protect the environment in areas such as the Albertine region, in West Nile, where forests are being depleted. You imagine a situation if civil society would not have been there. And it goes back to this issue that was the NGO Bureau acting in good faith by suspending without calling these organizations to order and say, can you show cause why disciplinary action shouldn't be taken against you because you have not fulfilled ABCD? The message I'm getting from the NGO Bureau's action is that perhaps the NGOs also should go to court, the High Court, and apply for an order of mandamus, where we'll ask the High Court to order the NGO Bureau to set up the board of directors, to set up the education committee, to set up the structures that are necessary at a sub-county level, that is the sub-county NGO monitoring team, the district NGO monitoring team, which do not exist. So if they themselves, powerful as they are, as a government entity, as a regulatory body, have not been able to put in those structures for the last how many years since the NGO Act was passed, what about an NGO that has failed to renew its license in a pandemic, in a situation where one of the financial vehicles where we would get money, DGF, is under suspension, and the future is bleak? So this is what I'm saying, that as a regulatory body and as an enabler, I think, and if they really appreciated the contribution of the sector to economic development, they ought to have come up and said, look, we see a problem here. You are all, as far as we are concerned, you ought to have put in measures A, B, C, D. Can you show cause why we shouldn't take disciplinary action? And the NGOs will be able to explain, as opposed to going and naming and shaming before. Because it now means that you don't see us as partners in the development process of the country, which unfortunately I find very absurd. So my view is, I think as a sector, we really need to continuously engage with the state, educate them on our contribution. And I would love to see our colleagues who work on the socio-economic rights area to come up with the data figures that will back up our arguments when we come to key decision makers within the state and say, look, this is the implication. Because we've seen even very tough bodies like URA appeal to taxpayers who have not been able to fulfill their obligation to come and explain to them. That's what it means, a partnership. That's what if URA can invite, and URA has been in existence, it's more powerful than the Bureau itself. And URA is the reason why this country exists, because it collects revenue. We are running a cash economy. What we collect is what they spend, besides the loans that we take out. So I think they should draw a leaf from the URA and say, can we call these organizations before we go and suspend them, before we go and name and shame them in the public arena? Because now the perception is that we are illegal entities. We are trying to avoid procedural matters. We are trying to avoid legalities. They could have summoned them and say, please come and explain why you are not fulfilling your obligation as per the law established.
Okay, fair enough. I think, Imelda, I lost you a bit. There was a question which Robert was trying to, attempting to answer, but I think I'll throw it back at you. I don't know whether you have the numbers. You see, there's been this argument. People are saying, okay, let's look at NGO sector averagely pays relatively better than government, including private sector. So when you look at probably what the proceeds that can be gotten from just employment that comes with the NGO sector in terms of pay as you earn, in terms of the taxes that go with the sector, you find that there's a lot of taxes that are being lost when you suffocate the operations of the NGO sector by closing, by suspending. As an economist, can you paint that economic figure for us? What do we stand to lose in terms of numbers when we suffocate the operations of the NGOs? When you suspend, now we have BGF. Until now, they're still trying to resolve a couple of issues. But how much of tax has been lost when we suspend organizations in terms of employment? How much of that does impact the revenue collection? What do we lose, Imelda? Can you paint a picture for us?
Okay. Thank you very much, moderator. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. First of all, if you look at the number of NGOs, currently we have over 10,000 NGOs in the country. Then definitely, if you look at the contribution of the NGO sector, it is actually, it contributes a great deal towards the economy. If you look at, for instance, actually all NGOs are paying pay as you earn, and most of them have been complying. We also look at NSSF, which is becoming a very, very big component. Then we're also looking at withholding tax. If you look at, like for instance, the consultants that are earning actually from the NGOs, of course, it's a requirement that of course withholding tax has to be deducted and remitted from them. So then the other thing is also, if you look at, so definitely, and of course the closure of NGOs comes at the wrong time when the economy is struggling to increase its domestic revenue. And of course, we think this timing is not perfect because currently, if you look at the 54 NGOs, first of all, each of the NGOs does not employ less than 20 people. So on average, if you look at just the 54 itself, okay, directly they're around 20 people, but there are those who are indirectly benefiting from the NGOs. If you look at the sectors like if you look at the hotels, for instance, if government is to close more and more NGOs, we'll see that other sectors will be affected. Of course, hotels will have lesser lesser workshops, and of course that translates into, of course, the income tax but partly hotels remit to government, the withholding tax, the local hotel tax. So basically, I can estimate that probably if this is going to be affected, that means on average not less than 10% of the total revenue in terms of domestic revenue would actually be affected. But also away from that, we know that also NGOs also play another vital role when it comes to issues of inclusive growth and development, because we know that this cannot be achieved without them. Because if you want growth to benefit everyone, we have to make sure that even the poorest of the poor also are part of the aspect. So the suspension is really going to even directly and indirectly we generate more domestic revenue. But if that money is not actually put to proper use, that money will continue to be wasted and stolen. And NGOs have been playing a very vital role. If you look at the time when NGOs were not there in Uganda, or almost non-existent, and right now, there's an improvement in the level of accountability and of course the reduction in the level of wastage of public resources. So also that money actually can be reinvested into the economy. Money that could have been stolen, it would be saved because of the NGOs. And you realize that most of the NGOs that have been clamped down are those that are dealing with issues of accountability, human rights, and that is also going to affect the economy also indirectly. Then also the budget process, we want to make sure that NGOs actually play a vital role to ensure that there is that bottom-up approach, to ensure that when you're trying to plan, even the ordinary citizen down there is able to actually benefit directly from resource allocation, which actually was quite limited. Because right now, if you look at the level of citizen participation, it's quite basing on the open budget survey, which stated that right now Uganda's level of citizen participation is very, very limited in the budget process. And NGOs have been trying to ensure that this is made possible, since they are in close proximity with their constituents. Of course, without NGOs, government cannot do it because they don't have enough resources to make sure that there are adequate consultations. You know that NGOs have been funding some of the processes at local government levels, which of course most districts don't have money for consultations. That's why you see that at times some of the consultations actually are not done the right way they should have been done. Hello?
Okay. Yeah. You're on.
Hello?
You're raising very. We can hear you. We can hear you, Imelda. But maybe as you wind up that.
Yes.
Point you
Okay.
mentioned.
Sorry. In other words, before actually government goes ahead to clamp down. Yes.
Proceed. Okay. Proceed.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to also talk about is the fact that if you look at, I try to scan through the budget performance report for actually the sector, of course, where the NGO Bureau actually is concentrated, and I realized that they have a number of key performance indicators that they've put forward. For instance, if you look at the recent report, 1920, of course, one of the key performance indicators that of course the NGO Bureau actually has put on board, they planned in 2019-20 to make sure that they sensitize NGOs in 25 districts. But surprisingly, if you look at the results, actually they only managed to sensitize NGOs in 8 districts. So it is really unfair that before you even go ahead and do what you have planned, you're clamping down. Perhaps some of the NGOs are not even aware of what they should be doing. So the fact that they were not able to meet their target, it is really not unfair. The other indicator before I wind up is that the performance thing where they perform very poorly. If you look at the issue of permits, in the recent financial year, NGO actually Bureau, one of the performance indicators was to make sure that they renew 100 and actually that of course they renew of course permits for at least 50% of the NGOs. Surprisingly, they actually only renewed 110 permits according to their annual budget performance report of 1920. Only 110 were renewed. So that means, of course, that most of the NGOs, especially those at local government levels, their permits were not renewed, I think because of the long process. So before you go ahead to suspend NGOs, so that means, of course, there is some kind of unfair treatment, because what is the criteria using to suspend the 54 NGOs? If we are seeing that almost half of them, according to the statistics, the permits have not been renewed. So there has to be a clear indicator. If you're going to close an NGO, what is informing that? And yet we know that most of them have not fall in the same boat. Thank you very much.
Okay, interestingly, for purposes of helping someone who is listening. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm trying to paint a picture here. You've given a very interesting statistic that about 10% of the revenue collected comes from the NGO sector. The 2020-2021 revenue target was about 20 trillion, and revenue collected around 19 point slightly, I think 19.5 trillion. So just let's do a round off and look at the 20 trillion that revenue is supposed to collect, and subject the 10% to understand in real terms, hypothetically, how significant the work of NGO is in terms of the economy of this country. Let me come to Job. Job, there's been this narrative that, okay, the behavior of government towards the sector, the NGOs, is by and large informed or misinformed especially by the actions of civil society actors that are engaging in the domain of governance and human rights. So there has always been that narrative that civil society is supporting subversive activities. It's activities that are antagonistic to the establishment. And that has kind of like shaped the perceptions the state has towards civil society and the relationship the state has with civil society. When I looked at this list, because even when the list came out, one of the arguments was that you see they are targeting organizations that are engaging in human rights and democracy work. And there were not very many that were engaging in human rights. Actually, I could see that Chapter 4, I could see your institution, I could see GLIS, Public Policy Institute, I saw SEDU there, SEWIT, AFIEGO, a couple of them, but the list has 54. And it's just about 8 or 10 of the 54 really are focusing on what I would call democracy and governance work. So does this narrative, which seems to be circulating, that the actions of government are informed by or misinformed by the perception government has towards NGOs, anything to go by that should be part of the discussions?
Felix, first of all, I need to mention that your analysis is wrong. If you look at that list, if you look at the list of 54 and you did a deeper analysis, you'll actually find that each of the organizations, if I were to say, okay, are they witch hunting anybody or are they witch hunting organizations, you'll actually find, I think it's a witch hunt. I think it's a witch hunt. So you'll actually find that for each of the organizations that are listed, either there is a board member who is connected to somebody of interest to the regime. So it's we can look at the list and we look at these organizations one by one. The organizations I personally had never heard of. When I went back to dig deeper and tried to check who was behind them, I actually realized that these people were of interest to the regime. But before answering your question, I wanted to just get back to the question you asked Imelda and Robert also tried to answer on what is the economic implication of these actions, which I call errant actions of the Bureau or of the regime. I was, sadly, we haven't had a comprehensive study on the value of the NGO sector, I think since around 1995, which was done, I think, by CBR. But there's been an attempt by the NGO Forum, and I think recently I saw they issued a call for consultants to Uganda and undertake an NGO sector value study. But just to give you basic figures which you can look at, and anybody that is listening there can extrapolate and see what we could be losing. CSBAG alone in 2017 paid tax worth $500 million shillings. ActionAid for over the past about 20 years, they will tell you they've been paying tax in excess of $1 billion shillings. Now that is just about tax. Now, how many NGOs exist in this country? Imelda told you 10,000. As far as the last I checked, actually, they were close to 14,000. Of course, the NGO Bureau, again, through their means of harassment, they put up that NGO validation exercise, which concluded that the NGOs which existed were not even 2,900, which actually is false. Now, there's a reason as to why, anyway, a number of NGOs shunned that NGO Bureau process. Now, I need also to mention that if you want to know what we are losing, even without doing this study, just go and look at banks. Ask banks, NGO Forum accounts, UONET accounts, Chapter 4, and a couple of other organizations. Towards the end of last year, I'm looking at those whose accounts were frozen towards the end of last year. If you looked at the amount of money which was frozen for close to a year, by the way, it is over 10 billion shillings, and I might be being modest, because 10 billion could be the budget of just one organization. So you'll find that NGO Forum alone, over 10 billion was frozen for almost a whole year. Now, just ask a bank, what does it mean to you for this money to be frozen? Yes, it's frozen. You have it as a bank, but you're not using it. What does it mean in terms of the transactions? Because the bank would be gaining if these organizations were actually transacting. So ask banks, what are you losing by this happening? Ask fuel stations, what are you losing? Ask tour and travel companies that rent out cars to organizations, what are you losing? Let's go back to service delivery. I recall when we were debating this NGO bill, the chairperson of the Legal and of the Internal Affairs Committee then, who was in Parliament, who was actually the host of the discussions on the bill, got up on the floor of Parliament and made an interesting remark. She said that if it were not for ActionAid alone, more than half of the students or of the children in her district, I think she was coming from either Movendo or something. This is Honorable Beni Namagga. She's former minister of Kampala. She said half of the children would never have gone to school in her district. Now, imagine, this is just in one district. Just spread it across the country and see what loss we are making. Now we are looking at only ActionAid. There's Oxfam. There are other organizations. If you got all these organizations and just said, let us try to do an amalgamation of how much contribution they're making to education alone, it's immense. So I think for me, the NGO Bureau needs to check its actions. Now, specifically to the question that you asked on, is it really organizations that are dealing with governance? Is it organizations that are challenging status quo? Is it organizations that are working on human rights? I want to say it is actually true that the organizations which are targeted are those that have an element of challenging status quo. Why? And this is not new. If you look at the legal and regulatory framework that is preferred for NGOs, you can track it along elections. After every election, there's either a law or an action from the government that is targeting NGOs. Right from 1996, when we had the first elections in this country. If you look at the revision of the NGO law, it has been tagged along elections. If you looked at many of these other laws, you remember the Public Order Management Act?
Yes.
Okay, before I go there, the first NGO law that we had in place was there's one, I think, of 1980 something, I forget. Okay, but that one, I mean, we're just trying to get back to normalcy. Then there's an NGO law which has just been amended, which was the process started in 2006, just after elections. and the law was put in place, I think, in 2008. Okay? That was the first that we can easily connect with. In 2001, there was an attempt to amend the law, and it emerged that actually the policy was weak. So it started the process of amending the policy. I think around 2005, 2000, through that period, the policy was amended. In 2006, the policy of the process of coming up with the Public Order Management Act came up. I think you remember that properly.
Yes.
Which was finally passed, I think, around 2000, just after the 2011 elections. Okay. Between there, the process of, I think that's when Minister Ronda was appointed to be in charge of the NGO, of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, of course, directly responsible for NGOs, the debate of where the NGO bureau needs to be located also emerged. And then these people insisted on locating it under Ministry of Internal Affairs because it was a security threat. But along that same time span, laws like Interception of Communications Act came up, anti-terrorism and others. All of them, if you do a critical analysis of them, you realize that these are actually working towards shrinking civic space. Now, fast forward, the NGO Act that now we are grappling with was passed in 2015. And I recall I was talking to one of the officials at the NGO Bureau, and he confided in me that the president was in somewhere in West Nile campaigning, and someone blackmailed NGOs and said, Your Excellency, the reason we're having a challenge here is because of these NGOs. And then he said, no, so what is the medicine? Then they told him, there's an NGO law which was passed and you failed to assent to it. He said, okay, bring it and assent to it. Immediately after the elections, he assented to it. So fast forward, after the 20, of course, before these elections, we saw the ban of New Year and all those other things. And now these actions have started. I think the first significant action that the NGO Bureau did this year was to ban those, were they 8 NGOs that they banned recently? And now this has followed. Now, I need to mention that this is just the beginning, because the reason I've been trying to give you that chronology is that as time goes by, the regime seeks to entrench itself further in power. Now, one of the ways of entrenching itself in power is by oppressing citizens, by oppressing citizen organizing. Now, of course, the next 5 years are going to be very complicated for the regime because the elections were clear. There's a lot of resistance. Resistance is going to continue. And of course, for those of us that are trying to sanitize the state of affairs, we should also be ready for a ripple effect from what's happening to the regime at the moment.
Wow, interesting chronology. And this now brings me to Bob. Within that context, it's very clear that we are heading into very interesting times. How should now civil society shape up? How should we engage? What's the way forward?
Thank you very much, Felix. That's a very good and relevant question. For you to be able to appreciate and understand that question requires you to also raise this question. When civil society was hit last week by the closure or suspension of 54 organizations, which groups did you see come out to raise an alarm beyond civil society organization? It was only civil society organizations, our international partners, who came up to speak on it. Where are our allies within this sector that we contribute to? I mean, the economy that we contribute to, the hotels that we support, our beneficiaries or clients of the services that we offer. Where are they? How come they didn't come up? That shows you there's a problem. And so, moving forward and to answer your question, I think it's high time we started identifying and mapping allies. Felix, where is the hotel and hospitality industry, the Uganda Association of Hotels, where you take all these workshops, you are always giving them money. Are they with us or against us? What is their position when they hear government has closed or is having a tough challenge with NGOs closing them down? Has it got an effect on them? Are they aware of the effect? What about the small and medium businesses They have a whole chamber. They have an association. Are they with us? Do they speak for us when we are closed? What about workers' unions? What about the manufacturers' association? The pens we are using here are made locally here. We are buying them every day. What about traders who sell us furniture, who sell us capital equipment, computers, toner? We're in a business of reporting. So we buy paper. Where are they? So that shows you that we need to get all these partners included. And when we speak as one voice, then I think the state will be able to listen. We further need to engage with state actors, especially the executive. We need to engage. Institutions here are not bold enough, I can assure you. Institutions are not bold enough to say, you know what, we cannot close this institution because we don't see anything wrong with it, or this matter does not require us to close them. Let's call them and we dialogue and ask them where the problem is. So we need to dialogue with the state and encourage advocacy on building strong institutions that go beyond. That when Felix Kafuma leaves the Alliance for Electoral Finance, the organization can continue. So we want also institutions to remain strong. You realize when the executive appointed recently one individual as a secretary to Treasury, the whole society was so excited and wondered, is this person going to turn around the whole economy as an individual? What is good? The so-called economics that works. You think one single individual is the one going to turn around the problems you have been grappling for the last 50 or so years since independence? Then we need to look at, you see, this country lacks what we call a think tank. A think tank that will always advise government, say, this action you are taking, this policy you're coming up with is going to have an effect on the economy, or these are going to be the consequences. As a think tank would advise you to restrain yourself from taking this, because these are the implications, both short-term, medium-term, and long-term. We need to advocate for a think tank. If it means civil society coming up with its own think tank that will always provoke government and say, before you do this intervention A, B, C, D, these are the issues on the ground that you need to address if you want to get positive results from whatever you are trying to do. The issue of subversive activities shall be neutralized if we continuously engage with the state and also get these allies. These allies who are beneficiaries from this, beneficiaries of our sector, the civil society sector. It's key to bring them on board, that when an attack on civil society happens, they speak with us with the same voice. I wish to.
Very interesting, very interesting. You really provoked me with that question. Where are the other actors that are outside the sector that benefit from the actions of civil society that are directly or indirectly affected when CSOs are suffocated? Let me come to you, Imelda. What next? How should we proceed from this situation that we are in? Bob raises some of the key action points, but let's pick it up from you. What is the way forward for civil society moving forward?
Okay. First of all, the way forward is actually two-way, both CSOs and also other players and CSOs. We have to come together and make sure that we actually promote, we actually ensure that human rights are not abused and CSOs are not closed unjustly. Otherwise, it's really going to affect our economy. All key players that are benefiting, direct and indirect, even government is benefiting, by the way, from CSO's existence, because a lot has changed. So, and also for CSOs, I think let's try to comply with actually the law, so that there's no excuse for government to come and close you. If, for instance, all our permits are up to date and we are filing our returns, I don't see any other reason. And of course, we are trying to work within the law. I think it will also make it very difficult for CSOs to be clamped. But above all, we need to work together, because we are here for the good of the economy. We're not here to actually fight government. Whatever work NGOs are doing is to supplement government efforts for the good of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Imelda. Interesting. The clarion call for CSOs to comply. Remember, it's also very rigorous to actually fulfill all the requirements that come with the compliance. I know what that means. I've seen a couple of my colleagues going through a horrendous time to go through this process of meeting the requirements for compliance. But let me come to Job. Job, as you discuss the way forward in this, I also wanted to talk about how within civil society, the sector itself, we are not united. You find that if it's not in my corner, well, that ball is not for me to play. How do we move as a block? Because when you touch one, you've touched the rest. How do we adopt the culture of bees, of working together and moving in the same direction? Because if today they are taking, if today it is my organization under the spotlight, then the following day it will be your organization under the spotlight. How do we remove or diffuse these differences within the sector so that we have one voice, but also as you discuss the way forward?
Before I get to that question you've asked, I want to get back to one point which Robert has made, but also Imelda. Now, my message to Imelda is that no form of compliance is going to stop the regime from harassing you if they believe that the work that you're doing is challenging them. Chapter 4 is one organization which has been helping other organizations to comply. Now, it is so strange that when Nicholas Opio was arrested, I think it was sometime last year, one of the charges that they had preferred for him, which I saw myself on his charge sheet, was not filing annual returns to the NGO Bureau. The NGO Bureau came and advised that actually Chapter 4 has been filing. It is that which has been helping other organizations to file. So we can't use that. Now, it's because the government or the regime was looking for a charge to hold him. They were holding him for something else, but they wanted something to justify why they should hold him. So there, the charge sheet was changed to money laundering. If you go to money laundering, you find that the accounts or the money they were accusing him of receiving, he has received it, or his organization has received it for over 5 years. And if anything, if they wanted to deal with the money laundering charge, they shouldn't have gone for Nicholas. They should have gone for the organization and frozen its accounts. Its accounts were never frozen immediately, but they arrested Nicholas Opio. So for me, the point I want to make is that no form of compliance is going to stop the regime from harassing you if they believe that what you are doing is challenging status quo. I want to mention also that compliance is actually a very difficult thing in this regime. If you look at an organization like SEDO, they will tell you that they have trekked to KCCA Makindye for over 8 months trying to get an MOU with the local government there, and they have failed. And they have failed. So how do you comply in such a setting? It means you just have to suspend your activities until you're able. But also, the law has other options. Suspension of permits is not the only action that the Bureau can take. There's an option of paying fines of, I think, 100 currency points per month of default. So if an organization has defaulted on its permit, why doesn't the NGO Bureau make some money from them? And I think NGO Bureau will be interested in making money. So basically what I'm trying to show you here is that this is more political than actually we are trying to look at it as just mere compliance. And then quickly to Bob. I think for me, if you look at, actually forget the question you raised, I'll respond to it. But let me first go to Felix's question about this kind of the lack of solidarity, the lack of coherence in the sector, the contradictions. I agree that they greatly affect us. And of course, the question is, how do we get out of that? I think one of the biggest challenges has been this unhealthy competition. And we have sung this song for a very long time. For the over 15 years that I've been in the NGO sector, unhealthy competition has been an issue. And it is caused partly by donors, because donors are putting money and they're telling you, okay, you people come and compete for this money. Now, already they have created a situation whereby IDEA and the National Coalition have to compete for money. Now, when we go and compete for money and the coalition gets and I don't get, I start looking at the coalition suspiciously. I start asking, but could the coalition be having friends in this donor agency? Could the coalition have Some people have been talking about allegations of kickbacks and bribery. So such images start emerging in our heads. Now, it trickles down even to the way we do work. I have done a proposal, the coalition has done a proposal. Okay, of course, me and the coalition, we are in totally almost in different trades, but I'm just giving an example. I've done a proposal, the coalition has done a proposal. So the coalition gets money to implement its activities. Then I realized that, hey, by the way, even me in my proposal, I wanted to do that. Now, how come the coalition is doing it? Is it possible that the donor gave my work to the coalition and is financing them? What is so special about them? And then I convene an activity. I don't want to invite the coalition. I can assure you, I have been part of the process of organizing activities where we are trying to convene national leaders. And you have a national leader calling you and asking you who is coming. Can you send me the list? You say, okay, I can't send the list now because we are compiling it. But on the list, there's so and so and so. Is so and so there? Yes, that person is there. And then someone says, okay, I'll come. And then next you see them not turning up. But they have also reached an extent of whereby someone says, for me, if you invite so and so, I am not coming. So I think for me, we need to agree that we might have differences, but the cause of the sector is broader than us. The sector is bigger than us. Right now, if you look at us, I think organizations that have been battering each other are all in the same boat. We are all being harassed by the same state that even some of us actually used to go and report each other to the same state. The state is also harassing those people. So if you look at us now, I think we really need to get back on the drawing board and ask ourselves the question, how do we move forward? Can we move forward together or we can't? For as long as we fail to answer that question, I think we're going to remain being battered. Right now, we should be putting up a serious fronted front. I mean, there are over 13,000 NGOs across the country. 54 have been attacked. We should all be getting up and saying, no, this is not acceptable. But you hear some people saying, some of those people, it is because they are not complying, so it's okay for them to be harassed. Little do you know, like the saying goes, when they came for the Jews, I did what? I kept quiet because I was not a Jew. Now they have come for me and there's no one to speak for me. So I think let us just agree that the only way we can defeat or we can be able to push back effectively is when we are united, and then let us unite and push back in the best manner that we can. Otherwise, they're going to continue dividing us and ruling us.
Wow, great. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our 1 hour interaction. Let me give Robert about 50 seconds to give us the parting shots. Then I'll also give Job Kiija 50 seconds to give us the parting shots. Robert?
Very much, Felix, for hosting us today. My parting shot is to really emphasize what Job has said, that we really need unity of purpose, because we understand what our problem is, what the issue is, and we need to confront it. But as we confront it, we need allies. We need allies. If it means even having allies as borders, numbers matter in a struggle. You need allies who, when you speak, the state says, we have to listen to these people. Otherwise, when they box you in one corner and everyone keeps quiet, then you are isolated. So we need to build as much allies as possible, especially these who are benefiting from the sector where we serve as a civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There you go. Job, your parting shots.
Actually, the point I wanted to respond to in respect to Robert is that this question of where are the other people when they are harassing us, especially those that we give business and others. I need to mention that the same question is asked by political parties when they are being harassed, and where is there as well as the civil society. But I just need really to mention to us that in a repressive regime, everybody is oppressed. So it is not only civil society that is being oppressed. Even the private sector that you're asking to come and speak for you, they're also being oppressed. They have their own struggles which they are fighting. So let us not feel isolated that because now they have come for us, these people. I mean, recently I saw a Bank of Uganda circular, which was saying that they are going to increase the minimum balance, I think, for microfinance institutions from 500 million to something like 10 billion. For commercial banks, I think from 10 billion to, 500 billion. Now, if you look at that, in itself, it is a form of harassment. But what has civil society done? Have we done anything in respect to that? I think the answer is no. So we need to know that everybody in a repressive regime is potentially an oppressed person. We all have struggles that we are dealing with, but I agree with you that we need to be able to build more solidarity across sectors, across organizations, and with other people, such that we can all be able to speak in unison. And I think for me, the challenge now is on the Ugandan citizen. The Ugandan citizen as an individual, as a bank, because it is also a citizen, as a hotel, because it is a citizen, since it is incorporated, as an NGO, you are also a citizen because you are incorporated. So we need to realize that we are in a state of repression, and in order for us to overcome it and come out alive, we need to be able to get together and challenge it.
Wow, fair to say. Imelda, you have the final say so that we can close this discussion in just under a minute. Imelda?
Thank you very much.
Your final say?
Okay, the other thing we also need to effectively engage the NGO Bureau so that it can play its role effectively, because if NGOs are being closed, if people are not complying, it is also affecting their performance as an entity. They need to also play their part, and we need to work together as Ugandans so that we can achieve a common goal. So I want to call upon the NGO Bureau to also work with us to make sure that we actually develop the country together as citizens. And also, I also want to agree with Job that citizens need to come on board, because they are the ultimate beneficiaries of the NGO activities. So over to you, the moderator.
Okay, that is said. We've come to the end of our 1 hour interaction, slightly short past the hour, but that's it. My name is Felix. With you in the studio, I had Imelda, an economist and a policy analysis specialist, currently working with Uganda with the Health System Strengthening Project under the Ministry of Health. I also had Robert Kirenga, who is the current Executive Director of National Coalition on Human Rights Defenders. And I also had with me Job Kiija, who heads Innovations for Democratic Engagement in and Action IDEA. It's been nice having this discussion with you. We can continue with the conversations on our online platforms. Till next week, bye-bye, stay safe.
Thank you, Felix. Bye.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you, fellow panelists.
All right, Bob. Bye.
Thank you and bye.
The monster of money politics is eating up Uganda's democracy. When you take money from a candidate, it means you are feeding the monster.